now. Okay. All right, so I'm Allison Petty. I'm the editor of Lee Enterprises Central Illinois newspapers and a member of the Illinois Associated Press Media Editors Association Board. Thank you all for being here today. We are coming together for a unique interview with the two major party candidates for Illinois Attorney General, Democratic incumbent Kwame Raoul and Republican Tom DeVore. This interview is part of a new initiative from the Illinois AP Media Editors Association, which has brought together more than 20 newspapers across the state from every region of the state. Questions were solicited from those news organizations, and they all plan to post coverage and a recording of this interview. Our interview panel today consists of, from Capital News Illinois, reporter Peter Hancock and Bureau Chief Jerry Nowicki, and from Lee Enterprises, State House reporter Brendan Moore. Brendan is going to start off our questioning today, so I will toss it to you, Brendan.
Thank you, Allison, and thank you to both the candidates. First question is for Mr. DeVore. The Attorney General is charged with defending the state in lawsuits and had a major role in doing so amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Mr. DeVore, you were a litigant in many of those cases. What would have looked different in that scenario with an Attorney General DeVore?
You know, the Attorney General does have the duty to defend the state parties in lawsuits. Also, it has at the same time the duty to defend the people of the state of Illinois. So dealing with these questions regarding the mandates, the Attorney General had a decision to make. He had a decision to make of whether or not he was going to represent the people or represent the governor or the other state agencies. And I think one of the things we've learned over the course of the last couple of years is that there was a fair question to be asked about the extent of the governor's ability to issue some of those mandates. You know, you have some on one side of the conversation saying he could absolutely do it. You had some that said he absolutely couldn't. But I think we would all agree as intellectual people, there was a fair question. And if there's a fair question as to whether or not the people of our state are being disenfranchised by executive power of the governor, if I would have been the Attorney General, my administration would have taken the side of the people and defended them against this executive overreach. And the governor would have been left to get his own attorneys to make the arguments for himself in court. That's where I think our current Attorney General went wrong. He should have defended the people and not defended the governor at every step of the way. Thank you.
And I'll give Attorney General Raoul a chance to respond to that.
Certainly. Let me say I was proud to have done both, represented the government and represent the people. We were faced with a deadly pandemic that was unprecedented. It was indeed an emergency. We had our hospitals overflowing. We had people dying. I have personal friends who have died from the coronavirus. And so there was no inconsistency in representing the government actors and representing the people. And the numbers demonstrate it. If you compare us to states that surrounded us, who did not impose the same type of mitigations we impose on a per capita basis, we saved more lives. We hospitalized less people. We had less people going on ventilators, and that's what emergency powers are meant to do, to save lives. And so I would do nothing differently than we had done, and I will agree with Mr. DeVore. It was a fair question to ask, but how many times you ask it is a fair question to ask too. It was asked and answered multiple times in multiple lawsuits, and the court's resources should not have been abused as they were.
And Mr. DeVore, you can have a very briefly chance to respond to that.
Yeah, I have a very brief response. I mean, everything that I just heard Mr. Raoul talk about was about the policy positions that were pursued by the executive branch. That's where, with all due respect, he missed the issue completely. Any of those policies that the governor thought were appropriate should have been pursued and vetted through the General Assembly, and the legislature should have been the one to craft those solutions. And to the extent they would have done that, we would have not been in court. We were in court because the executive officer took it upon himself to go to doing executive fiat tantamount to lawmaking in violation of the separation of powers. If our attorney general would have stood up and said that this is an excessive use, like Judge Grisho did, calling it the evil that the law was intended to protect the people against, we wouldn't have had to have gone down this path. But we went down this path not because of the policies, but because of the excessive nature that the executive branch was disregarding the legislature.
All right, move on to the next question. This is for Attorney General Raul. Earlier this year, you pushed through a bill aiming at cracking down on organized retail crime. It gave the Attorney General's office additional power to go after so-called kingpins behind those crimes. To what extent have you begun to implement this, and what have been the results?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So we started working on organized retail crime prior to getting the bill passed, and so we've had several successes, including recovering millions of dollars of merchandise that was stolen on its way to retail establishments, busting a crime ring that was stealing automobiles, recently having busted a ring that was stealing televisions. And we have several ongoing investigations, and we're collaborating with both states' attorneys, police departments, and chiefs, law enforcement partners, both on the federal, state, and local levels. I cannot say on this interview, for the sake of not compromising some stings that we have ongoing, what we're doing, but I think we're very successful. In addition, we've gone around the state training law enforcement partners on this issue. We've had participation by loss prevention experts from retail establishments that have been focused on this for years. Nationally, I think in the past year, it's been $68 billion of loss from organized retail crime. If we dismiss it as isolated retail theft actions instead of organized crime scheme, we're not treating it the right way. And so training law enforcement is an important part of it as well.
And just very brief follow-up, but do you see your office, the role as more in a supporting role for local jurisdictions, or do you really see the Attorney General's office leading some of these investigations?
We are leading some of the investigations, and we have been even prior to the law that gave us the direct authority by way of our statewide grand jury act to prosecute these specific crimes. The Attorney General's office, it's important to understand, does not have original authority to prosecute crimes, writ large. The statewide grand jury act gives us authority for specific crimes, such as gang activity that goes across county boundaries, human trafficking, gun trafficking, internet crimes against children. We asked for, and the legislature gave us, organized retail crime as another such authority that we can bring directly without asking permission of a local state's attorney to bring action. So we do intend to continue leading and to be lead prosecutors on it as well.
All right, thank you very much. For these next set of questions, I'm gonna turn it over to Jerry Nowicki.
Sure. Hey, gentlemen, thank you for being here.
I'm sorry, did I not get the opportunity to respond to the statewide grand jury act? Is that okay? I just didn't know
Sure.
the format.
Yeah, sure. Very briefly. Yep.
Just briefly, I would want to say that again, I was getting cut out a little bit with Mr. Raul. I apologize, but one of the points I wanted to make, the statewide grand jury act is not the limitation for which the Attorney General's office can help fight crime. Mr. Raul is incorrect in that he does have concurrent jurisdiction with state's attorneys in every one of the 102 counties. The Illinois Supreme Court has made it clear that he has concurrent jurisdiction and can choose to go into any county he wants and to pursue criminal cases if he deems it necessary. The state's attorneys may have a problem with that and may want to try to limit his ability to do that, but it is not true that he doesn't have concurrent jurisdiction. He, in fact, can do that if he chooses to do so. That's all I had.
We were going to get into crime as a sort of the AG's role in crime. So Attorney General Raoul, maybe we'll skip there and just, if you want to go into, should the AG's office be playing a bigger role in prosecuting crime in Illinois? Or what role do you play currently?
Oh, sure. Well, I already touched on our leadership on organized retail crime. Normally, when we come in at the county level on offenses that are not enumerated in the statewide Grand Jury Act, we do so in conflict situations. For instance, we've prosecuted a number of murders in Vermilion County over the last few years. We've prosecuted in Winnebago County a public integrity case against the Winnebago County coroner. These arise out of situations where there was a conflict with this state's attorney. Additionally, we do collaborate on investigations. We lead the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force in 101 of the 102 counties throughout the state. We have a very sophisticated investigative high-tech crimes team that investigates these crimes that are on the rise. We have additionally partnered. I've made strategic hires. I hired a woman who now serves as my chief of staff, former U.S. attorney in the Northern District, to help increase our partnership with federal law enforcement. My chief investigator is a former FBI agent. I hired a career prosecutor from DuPage County to be my deputy AG of criminal. And these strategic hires have been critical at allowing us to partner with law enforcement agencies on gun running cases, on again, organized retail crime cases, whether it's human trafficking, on a number of cases. We co-chair a task force with the FBI with regards to IDES fraud, and we've had several indictments on that front. Oh, I should add that we also went to the legislature to ask for authority. Just yesterday, not too far from my home, there was a shooting, just earlier this morning on the feeder ramp on Ohio. I partnered with Director Brendan Kelly to go to the legislature to get authority for us to directly prosecute gun crimes on state roads.
And then to Mr. Raoul, it sounds like you want, or pardon me, Mr. DeVore, sounds like you want to maybe expand the investigative authority under the Attorney General's office. So how does it look different under your administration than what we're seeing currently? And do you need added resources to realize your vision?
Well, coming to the second part of that first, talking about what we need added resources, I'm not the incumbent Attorney General, so I haven't had the benefit of Mr. Raoul's knowledge of knowing where those resources are currently being deployed and how you might be able to take existing resources and use them differently. I'm not suggesting that he should do that or needs to do that. I'm just merely saying I don't have the benefit of that information to date. But the Attorney General points something out that I think maybe is a little bit philosophically different than him and I. Is that the Attorney General has concurrent jurisdiction with the county state's attorneys. He has the ability, if he chooses to go into a county and to prosecute crimes, even the one that he just talked about, where he's talking about seeking legislative ability to do that. He doesn't need it. He can do it now. The Illinois Supreme Court said decades and decades ago he has concurrent jurisdiction. Now, if he starts getting pushback from a county state's attorney, that may have to be addressed in the court, but he certainly can take the first step if he chooses to do so. It doesn't have to merely be a conflict situation. One example, I've heard Mr. Raoul talk about the retail theft. I have been into almost every county, and Cook and the Collar counties especially, talking to local law enforcement about retail theft that's spiraling out of control. Their views on that, there's a lot of reasons they think that's happening, but one of them is that Kim Foxx and Cook County has chosen to arbitrarily decide not to prosecute felony offenses for theft unless they break $1,000, even though the statute says otherwise. Mr. Raul, if he chose to, could use not only the bully pulpit that he has to bring attention to that statewide, he could also go in and choose to prosecute those himself, again, if he thought it was necessary. Those are the conversations we need to be having. And again, it's not related to conflict-only situations. And if Kim Foxx wants to try to stall or to otherwise get in the way of the Attorney General's office, she can take a shot at that if she wants to. But it doesn't take legislative authority to do that if the Attorney General wants to.
Okay, so Brendan, I'm going to skip around here again, but Mr. DeVore, you brought up Kim Foxx, and at the Illinois State Fair, you said she better get to prosecuting or we'll find a way to prosecute her. Is that an indication of your plan to prosecute political opponents, or I guess find a way to prosecute her? That it seems like a broad statement for the Attorney General.
It's a very broad statement, and she's not a political opponent of mine. But look, there is a message for people that travel this state. If you actually travel the state and you talk to people, they're frustrated with elected officials arbitrarily making decisions that don't make any sense to them. And while as you're talking about this specific question, prosecutorial discretion is one thing. But when you take prosecutorial discretion to the point that you may be engaging in official misconduct yourself by failing to perform a duty that the law requires you to perform, that's at least a conversation that has to be had, not just with Kim Foxx, but with other public officials. They have a duty to perform their job, and to merely just arbitrarily choose what they want to do that they think's best based upon, whatever social policies that they want to pursue. There's a real legitimate conversation to be had there about whether that rises to the level of official misconduct. It needs to be a conversation that's had at all levels. Otherwise, we just have public officials doing whatever they think is right to do, regardless of what the law might say. That's what that comment was intended.
What would your threshold be then? I'll let you, just a second, Attorney General. What would your threshold then be for engaging in that type of prosecution or investigation?
Again, you have to look, again, if you're talking specifically about Ms. Foxx.
Sure, yeah. And anyone
Sure.
else, because it sounds like if you apply it to her, you're going to want to apply it to quite a few people.
Well, you got to apply it again universally across the state. Again, we'll talk about generally at any elected office. Any elected office. Let's take Mr. Jones, for example, that was just now under federal indictment under the red light camera legislation. If in fact what he's alleged to do is official misconduct. And why is it over the course of since Governor Pritzker's been in office, we've had 9 public officials indicted by the federal prosecutors for engaging in, again, unlawful conduct. It shouldn't be the federal prosecutors doing all of that. We as a people in Illinois should be doing that, investigating them ourselves and making those determinations one by one, specifically of whether or not there's official misconduct going on by our public officials. We need to do that and give confidence to our people that we are actually looking at that. Because if you travel this state, the people who are the important ones think that it's a free-for-all and that public officials aren't held to account for if they're doing things inappropriately. The Attorney General's office needs to take an active role in putting confidence in that office that they are investigating and, when necessary, pursuing those charges. It shouldn't be taken lightly. It's a very serious conversation, but it's a conversation that's not been happening for a long time in our state.
Okay, AG Raul, you can respond to that. And then also, is the why do you think is the federal government doing a good enough job investigating these crimes?
You asked me, is the federal government doing a good enough job?
Yeah, I guess just to Mr. DeVore's point, why would it be your office instead of the current level of investigation that's occurring with the U.S. Attorney's Office currently to look into corruption?
In all of the 50 states, the federal government tends to be the top prosecutor and investigator because they have the FBI at their disposal of public corruption. It's not limited to the state of Illinois. I challenge Mr. DeVore or anybody else to look at the numbers in each and every one of the 50 states. We have charged 24 public integrity cases since during my tenure, and we have 11 current public corruption cases. I want to touch a little bit on the notion of prosecuting a prosecutor for the exercise of their discretion, or the notion of a candidate for attorney general saying that I'll find a way. That's a signal of somebody who will abuse the authority given to the attorney general. Mr. DeVore also said, after prevailing in his primary, how many of the establishment Republicans congratulated me on my victory? 0. I may have to investigate them before I investigate Governor Pritzker. Those are dangerous statements, particularly in today's environment. There have been prosecutors who have been prosecuted for abusing their authority in political ways, and somebody who overtly makes these statements as a candidate for attorney general should not be let anywhere near the door of the attorney general's office.
Okay. I guess, Mr. DeVore, is there any thing you need to respond to there in terms of the types of statements you're on the record is going, and do you need to mitigate those types of statements either in this race? Okay, so we were giving you an opportunity to sort of explain or contextualize some of the comments you made that had Mr. Raoul had cited, and we didn't hear anything from your initial response.
Okay,
so.
well, that's good. When Mr. Raoul says that I've made dangerous statements because I raise the issues that people across this state are talking about, if you actually talk to them, and I say to the people listening to this and to Attorney General Raoul, a dangerous statement is going on television as the Attorney General and lying to people, saying that you have referred the Jenny Thornley workman's comp fraud matter to the appellate prosecutor's office, while simultaneously the appellate prosecutor has sent correspondence to the Attorney General's office saying you've never referred anything to us. We don't know why you would refer that to us. We don't do work comp prosecution. And that if you think there's a conflict for which we should be appointed, file a motion with the court and have them appoint us. That is the most dangerous statement I've heard as a deflection of the obligations of our attorney general, is because it implicates the governor's office, and the governor's office is the largest campaign contributor for the attorney general. That's the most dangerous statement, of actually lying to people that you've done something that you've not done. And so I take issue with him raising comments that I've made without remotely considering the fact that, again, I don't believe to date I've ever got on camera and lied to the people of this state. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Raoul, you can respond there and maybe provide as much context as you can.
Yeah, I'll respond to his allegations of me lying about the Jenny Thornley matter. But I would like to point out, he didn't answer the question about saying that he would investigate Republicans. He didn't answer the question about looking for a way to prosecute Kim Foxx. He did not, he deflected. With regards to Jenny Thornley, we did contact the Dan Wright, the Sangamon State's attorney, Sangamon County State's attorney. We did directly have conversations with Special Prosecutor John Barnard at the State Appellate Prosecutor's Office, who had already been handling a matter of fraud with regards to Jenny Thornley, alerting them about the workers' compensation matter. So Mr. DeVore is either uninformed or he just wants to name call. The reality is Mr. Robinson, who I spoke to after he made his comment and sent that letter, acknowledged that we had communicated with the State Appellate Prosecutor's Office in January and February of this year, and acknowledged that they were aware of the matter, and acknowledged that they already had a case that they were prosecuting, and it was logical for them to decide how they utilize a workers' compensation allegation, whether it's an aggravating matter in the ongoing prosecution that they have with Ms. Thornley, or whether they file a different case. So I lied to no one. And he still hasn't responded about saying he would investigate Republicans that didn't congratulate.
I'll investigate any public official in the state, regardless of political party, if they've alleged to do wrongdoing, including the governor, whose name is on the fraudulent workman's compensation documents. And again, the attorney general just deflected while accusing me of deflecting. He needs to commit, if in fact he's not deflecting, that he'll file a motion in Sangamon County asking to have the special prosecutor appointed in regard to the work comp fraud of Jenny Thornley. Commit to the people that he'll file that motion now and not wait till after the election, and we won't have to talk about it anymore.
Okay.
Let me just follow.
Sure.
If I could, just because it's important to recognize that there are two people running for attorney general. One who has experience as a prosecutor, and one who has never served as a prosecutor, and would know that you just don't go fishing. You don't just say you're going to investigate somebody or you're going to prosecute somebody unless you have facts or evidence to lead you in that direction. You don't use the power of this office as a tool to go after people you just don't like. That's an abuse
Attorney General
of power.
Raul, do you want me to show them the email from the Division of Insurance who said this is a clear case of workman's comp fraud, and they would recommend it for prosecution if they know somebody will prosecute it? Clear case. I'll give the email to these reporters and they can show it. It's not a fishing expedition. They've confirmed it's fraud, but they know nobody will prosecute it because you won't let them. And
Well,
I've never been a
fishing.
prosecutor. I've never been a prosecutor, but you know who was never a prosecutor? Lisa Madigan, and she was exponentially more effective as Attorney General.
Let me be
Last
clear
word.
about what I was saying about fishing expedition. He still hasn't answered the question about investigating Republicans for what, or prosecuting Kim Foxx. He just says, I would investigate or I would prosecute. That is what I would call a fishing expedition. If you don't have evidence of wrongdoing, why are you saying that you're going to investigate somebody?
All right, Brendan Moore, back to you.
Thank you, Jerry. And so we have to move on a little bit.
Sorry.
No, it's all good. Jump around a little bit. But Mr. DeVore, you brought up earlier in your comments the topic of prosecutorial discretion and maybe local state attorneys not kind of performing their duty under the law. I'm going to move on to kind of maybe a similar topic. So just on the issue of Safety Act and crime, you've spoken out against that act and criticized how the legislation was enacted. If you are elected Attorney General and the Safety Act remains the law of the state, will you ensure that the law is followed, even if you think it might be unconstitutional?
Well, if it's unconstitutional, which it is, and I don't just say that, I say that we now have over 50 state's attorneys in the state of Illinois who are now doing, for all intents and purposes, the Attorney General's job in bringing causes of action on numerous counts that it's unconstitutional. It is in fact unconstitutional. The case law is clear from 5 decades ago that the legislature can't arbitrarily create bailable versus non-bailable categories. The law is crystal clear. It's not even a question. So again, to the extent there are unconstitutional provisions in there, it has to be deemed unconstitutional. If a court rules that it's constitutional and its provisions are lawfully adopted, then the Attorney General's office has an obligation to uphold it. That's absolutely true. But before we even have that conversation, we got to get past now 50 and growing arguments by county state's attorneys that this thing has several bases for being declared unconstitutional.
To follow up a bit, as the state's lawyer, would it not be your responsibility to defend the state, defend a law that was passed by duly elected representatives and signed by the governor?
Absolutely not. I have an equal obligation if I believe that it was passed and it is in fact substantively unconstitutional. I have a fact to actually take action against them, similar to what the state's attorneys have done, to bring an action on behalf of the people. We keep talking about these state actors. The Attorney General has a duty to the people of this state to defend them against unconstitutional conduct from the governor's office, from the legislature, and that's what we're dealing with here. So bringing that action and having it deemed constitutional or unconstitutional is a threshold question. Once that question has been answered, then the Attorney General knows how to move forward. But no, you don't just arbitrarily sit back and say, Well, the legislature passed it, the governor signed it, I have a duty to defend it. That's what attorney generals do, whose top two contributors to their campaigns are in fact the executive and the legislature. If you're representing everybody equally, you have a duty to the people to raise these issues. And again, these issues are glaring. It's not even a fair question as to whether this act was passed in a constitutional manner. It's absolutely passed unconstitutionally.
Just a quick follow-up on that, but so you're saying if you are elected and assuming that the governor is reelected, would you sue the governor in your official capacity over this or any other laws that you may think are unconstitutional?
Doesn't matter what governor it is. If it's Governor Bailey that gets elected, and I believe on behalf of the people of this state that there is an unconstitutional law, I will sue him too, because that's what you have to do. That's the oath that you took. Doesn't matter whether it's Governor Pritzker, Governor Bailey, Governor Rauner. If the law is unconstitutional, you have a duty to protect the people. And so if Bailey's elected governor or Pritzker's elected governor, and the Safety Act is still in question because this has not been resolved yet. And if it's not been resolved by that time, and it's my administration, I will intervene as the Attorney General, and we will take up the issue for the courts to decide the constitutionality, which is what Attorney General Raul should do right now. Let the court answer the question.
Mr. Attorney General, I'll give you a chance to respond as well, but I'll also add this follow-up of just on the Safety Act. What components do you think should be revisited and possibly changed, and why?
Sure. With regards to Safety Act, the Safety Act is a comprehensive bill that has a lot of components. And I want to say this about the Safety Act, because one of the components of the Safety Act was police certification and enhancement of our police certification process. And I presided over 25 meetings with state's attorneys, police chiefs, sheriffs to develop that component of the bill. In fact, the chiefs of police gave me their Public Servant of the Year award as a result of the work on the Safety Act. With regards to components that merit looking at, and I think the legislature is in that process and they're in touch with some state's attorneys, as well as other chiefs of police and others, clarifying with regards to a law enforcement officer's capacity to remove somebody from a scene in a case of trespass, clarifying the capacity to hold somebody. There could be some language changes with regards to people who may be a threat to the public at large or to individuals. I think those are two major components that can use some clarifying. There's conversations that are ongoing. There's a veto session in between the time of enactment and now. They've already revisited other components of the Safety Act prior to those earlier enactment dates, and so I think this will take care of itself in the ordinary legislative process. Meanwhile, I do have the obligation to defend the lawsuits that some of my partners in law enforcement have filed, but we have ongoing conversations at the same time.
And then, Attorney General, if you could just to follow up, I guess, how do you view your role in terms of, I guess, defending state laws? I guess, does your personal opinion about the constitutionality of the law play a factor if the law is signed by the legislature or signed by the governor, passed by the legislature?
Yeah, I think it does. I think, my obligation as a lawyer in general is towards justice. And so if, the evidence is such, or the law is such that I would have to concede on constitutionality, I would have a conversation with my client and would have to do so. I don't believe that's the case here. And so we're going to vigorously defend the lawsuits.
All right, I'll turn it back over to Jerry.
Okay, so we had touched on this a little bit, Attorney General Raoul, but your first term when you ran, you had a large focus on gun crime and your public advertising and your campaign speeches. Have you done enough to curtail that in your first term? And how do you start on your second?
First, to answer your first question, have I done enough? No. If I had done enough, we wouldn't have the level of gun violence that we have. Have I done a lot? Yes. We created, I hired data scientists, and we've created what we call Crime Gun Connect, a state-of-the-art crime gun tracing platform. What I do know about the gun violence that is experienced, because, you know, as you mentioned, as a candidate for Attorney General, I talked about how gun violence had occurred directly outside of my home while my kids were at home, how a 13-year-old boy, when my son was 13, was shot directly across the street from my home. So it's something that I'm very passionate about. I've had friends who have lost sons to gun violence, sons and daughters to gun violence. So I'm dedicated to it. I've filed suit successfully to have the license of a rogue gun dealer that manufactures guns that are illegal to own in Illinois, that are cheap guns. We've had their license revoked. I've prosecuted gun runners. Again, I've sought authority from the legislature and got it to be able to prosecute gun crimes on state roads. We've partnered with Secret Service's National Threat Assessment Center, and we've done over 10 trainings on how to avoid targeted violence, such as the targeted violence that occurred on the 4th of July, and it's made very personal to me because one of my prosecutors was actually a survivor, took a bullet to the elbow on the 4th of July. And so I differ with Mr. DeVore, who would advertise a fundraiser where he would have a gun raffle right after a tragic 4th of July shooting. Instead, I've been partnering, trying to prevent such acts of targeted violence, and we will continue to do so. Those are just a few of the things that we've done in addition to prosecuting murder cases and other violent cases.
Okay, Mr. DeVore, what can the state do, or what can the Attorney General do in terms of gun crime, and any other comments, I guess, on that gun raffle as well?
Know anything about a gun raffle? If somebody had a fundraiser across the state for me that had a gun raffle, one, I don't find it inappropriate that they did that. It's legal. You know, maybe our Attorney General can come back to actually dealing with what's legal and what's not versus using political banter. But again, if somebody had a gun raffle at an event for a fundraiser of me, you know, so be it. But I can't recall specifically what event he's talking about or if I would have even been there. But dealing with gun violence, I hear everything that the Mr. Raoul talks about. You know what I don't hear him talking about is what the people in these communities have to say about any of this, because I have spent a lot of time there. And there's a lot of common themes that come out of these conversations. One is many of them don't even know who the Attorney General is, let alone what he might have been doing to help crime in their communities. There's a combination of a couple of things they talk about. One is the absolute economic disparity of their communities and how without that being addressed simultaneously with the crime, that it's just a circle that continues to perpetuate itself. And so getting legislature to talk about what they can do to help those communities, the Attorney General needs to use his voice to help accomplish that. And if that's happening, I can tell you the folks that I'm talking to don't hear that. Another thing is anywhere you're at in this nation, anywhere in this state, it is a common conversation of what's going on in Cook County and Chicago being soft on crime, the gun crimes. We see them all over everywhere. And I was at an event about a month ago. This young man was there. He was running a boat tour that I was on. And I asked him, I said, you familiar with the crime? He says, yes, sir. I said, can you tell me what's wrong? He said, sir, and he didn't know who I was. He said, sir, when people who are inclined to commit crimes realize that the consequences for committing those crimes are getting softer and sometimes not existent, they're likely to either continue to commit them or to commit more serious crimes. And so being tough on crime is an absolute necessity that's not happening in Cook County. The Attorney General can use his voice to help with that. And that will deal with some of this gun crime. But just merely going out and talking about general conversations like the Attorney General has talked about, it doesn't deal with the issues that the people are raising when you actually talk to them. So if you want to be tough on crime, generally speaking, and the ones that they're using weapons to commit will also benefit from that if people realize that when you actually go do these things, there's going to be serious consequences.
Just to respond, if I may. Sure.
Briefly.
So, as you all know, I came to be an Attorney General from 14 years in the legislature, and one of the bills I passed was to make sure that we have enhanced penalties on repeat gun offenders. That was a bill that was championed by Senator Kwame Raoul at the time. Additionally, with regards to investment of resources, I do agree with Mr. DeVore with regards to the need of investment of resources into these communities. We don't have a lot of resources that we have control of in the Attorney General's office, but we do have a pool of funds that we support organizations that deal with survivors of crime. Under my tenure, we've expanded that to deal with violence prevention as well. So we supported groups such as Ready Chicago that has given alternatives to young men and women who are at risk, and their program has been proven to work. And so perhaps Mr. DeVore has not heard about those steps that I've taken, but I do agree with him on the notion of investment in these communities.
Okay, so Mr. DeVore, I had a chat question from one of the editors here come up regarding your statement on officials being held to account for not carrying out laws. How does that play into Chicago's status as a sanctuary city, and is there any level of Attorney General action needed in regard to that status?
Well, we have the state law that, what is it called? I believe the Attorney General would know, the Trust Act, the Illinois Trust Act, that, was signed by Governor Rauner, that deals with the issue of, sanctuary, call it sanctuary status, but really that we don't participate in dealing with immigration issues with the federal government. So, to me, we have the issue of law, and whether that law is constitutionally in Illinois or constitutionally in the federal sense. I, as the Attorney General, would have any concern with policies, ordinances, et cetera, that disregard either federal or state law. Okay, that's what I would have a problem with. So being a sanctuary state or city to the extent that it completely disregards someone's immigration status if they're here illegally, I have a problem with that, because that's us saying we're going to ignore federal law. I don't think we should ignore any law.
Anybody need to be prosecuted for that or held to account through your legal actions?
Well, again, the Illinois official misconduct talks about you can potentially be prosecuted for failing to perform a duty required by law. If you had a specific fact pattern of where someone may have had an obligation to do that, we could talk about it. Whether they could be prosecuted under state law for official misconduct of not enforcing a federal law, that's a very broad legal question that I don't think Mr. Raoul or either one could give you off the cuff.
Okay. I'll go back to you, Brandon.
Jerry, just very briefly, we'll touch upon the issue of election integrity. First, just a yes or no answer to this question, but is Joe Biden our duly elected president?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that was easy. And next question would be, do you see any circumstance where you might, through the Attorney General's office, contest the results in Illinois in the 2024 election? What role does the Attorney General's office have in ensuring election integrity? And I guess I'll start with the Attorney General on that.
Yeah, I think the Attorney General does have a role in ensuring election integrity, and has long had a role, and along with local states attorneys has acted in a role of making sure that there's not electioneering at ballot places, at voting locations, and making sure that any of the election laws are not being broken, because the integrity of our elections is central to upholding our democracy. But included with that is making sure that there's no non-meritorious criticism of our election process. And we've had a lot of that nationally, and it undermines our democracy. We've seen the behavior that has grown out of that, and it's a very, very dangerous thing. And that's why I've committed some of my staff to working with an organization called States United to fight against that effort to undermine our democracy and undermine our elections, the integrity of our elections.
Mr. DeVore.
As Mr. Raoul started that response, I was like, I agree with pretty much all of it till it got to the part about then getting outside the state of Illinois and dealing with, politicizing it beyond what we as attorneys should be dealing with. The Attorney General's office has a significant role to play in making sure that we have elections that have high integrity, no doubt. How can we do that? You talked about specifically 2024. One of the things that I know the Republican Party has done better that they've not done in the past in Illinois is having more poll watchers and election judges. That's something that the Democrats have been good at for some time. If after this election, if people bring specific articulable circumstances forward that says here's an issue that violates election law, then those need to be pursued and potentially prosecuted by the Attorney General. But to the extent, again, this general vague conversation about election fraud, that's a dangerous conversation. So I do agree with Mr. Raoul on that. We have to make sure that when we're talking about election fraud, especially in Illinois, which is what him and I care about, if we're going to be talking about investigation and prosecution, we have to have specific circumstances. And if those circumstances warrant it. So I doubt that him and I disagree on that.
And just to follow up quickly on that, the Attorney General said that some of these lawsuits that and these challenges we've seen in other states undermine democracy. Do you agree with that?
I'm not willing to go that far because, again, we're not dealing with propaganda here to create fodder for, to me, what doesn't matter, which is our state. If there's people filing lawsuits in other states, I've heard about them. Are they trying to undermine democracy, or whether they have specific articulable facts? I don't know. Maybe Mr. Raoul knows, but I'm certainly not going to discredit people bringing forth causes of action, trying to make a point in a court of law. If it's not a meritorious case, the courts will dispose of those in short order.
All right. Turn it back to Jerry.
Okay, Mr. DeVore, on the topic of lawsuits, what happens to your private practice if you are elected Attorney General? Do you completely step aside? I'm not even sure if there's prohibitions on maintaining that office while AG, but also on the topic of lawsuits, you sued the governor for calling you a grifter. You sued the mother of your girlfriend for allegedly criticizing you. And then about 5 years ago, you'd sued a special education teacher for criticizing your characterization of some students as window lickers, alleged characterization maybe. So is the lawsuit a tool you're using to maybe quash public criticisms? And should we expect that level of private litigation from you if you are elected Attorney General?
There's a lot of different questions in one statement there, and I'm not sure which ones to deal with. But look, let's talk about the attorney or the governor's comments. The governor's comments, he never at one time said that what he called me, which is a thief for all intents and purposes, wasn't defamatory. He raised the argument that as the governor, he can defame people all he wants and go about saying whatever he likes, and he has that immunity. That was his argument. As to these other causes of action, those are personal issues to the extent those persons are trying to say those things. But in general, I'll say, merely because, you know how many people are stifled to run for office because they're scared that they're going to be absolutely taken to task on their whole manner of things that exceed the office? A lot. You know what? Governor Pritzker just sent a letter through his law firm to a news organization in the North saying that what you're doing is defamatory to me. Please stop. So when it rises to the level of it's not just political talk and it's accusing people of committing crimes and saying other things that impugn their ability to do their job, they have an absolute right to defend themselves. Me, the governor, Mr. Raul, and anybody. And to suggest that it has some ulterior motive other than defending your character, I take issue with that because that's what it's about. The governor had the right to send that letter when he sent it. No, just as much as I have the right to defend myself. And if someone says something like that to Mr. Raul, I would hope he would do the same thing.
What do you do with your private practice if you become elected Attorney General?
There's a lot of other lawyers in our office that are already handling most of those cases and would continue to handle those cases as well. So, you know,
Would you accept any income from that?
I will not be. Whether I would or wouldn't, I can tell you the answer is no. I've already made that clear to them that it's, again, and I've not even looked into the details of that. Mr. Raul may know, but I know my decision that I made is not something that has to be vetted because I won't get any income from it. I won't be a part of it. I'll be completely disconnected and have nothing to do with the financial part of it.
And should we expect these level of private lawsuits from you if you're to continue if you're elected Attorney General?
You mean you're asking me if somebody's going to defame me in the future?
Are you going to plan on suing people who speak ill of you as your attorney, if you're Attorney General?
You know, whoever asked that question, I put them in the category of people that need to stick to reporting. If someone defamed me, anytime in the future, am I going to defend myself? Absolutely. But to suggest that that means you're going to go out and just start filing lawsuits against people at will, that's a poor choice of words and completely irresponsible for whoever asked that question. Of course, I'm going to defend myself if I need to, no more than Attorney General Raul will defend himself, and Governor Pritzker currently defends himself. So it's not unique to me.
I can reply because I think your line of question speaks to something that we as lawyers and certainly as Attorney General have to have a respect for, and that's of course resources. You know, lawyers, whether they're Attorney General or independently, can be sanctioned for abuse of filing lawsuits and non-meritorious lawsuits. As we talk about the defamation lawsuits that were referenced before, including one against a special ed teacher for objecting to Mr. DeFore referring to some kids as window lickers. First off, I don't think we want the courts to be used to stop teachers from being protective of students when somebody's gonna do something that I think is just unconscionable. And then the other thing is that's important to look at is the outcome of those lawsuits. That lawsuit was eventually dismissed, right? And so it's one thing to file a lawsuit. If you're really trying to file a meritorious lawsuit, carry it out to the point where you know it has merit and you can prevail. If the number one definition to the number one defense to defamation is truth.
You know, Attorney General Raul, let me just say what you just said on this camera is defamatory because you weren't there. You don't know anything about it. It was not everything to do with special needs kids. It didn't have anything to do with a special ed teacher. None of that.
I didn't say anything about special needs kids.
Yes, you did.
I said kids.
You said disabled kids. But you know what? I dropped the case because the young man who made those defamatory statements was scared to death. And so why should I put him through more than I already went through? So don't talk about things you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, how many special needs kids have suffered tremendously for your failure to defend them against the governor's tyrannical behavior? Thousands and thousands of special needs kids have lost their learning that they'll never recover in their lifetime. That's true. And that's on you, sir. So please don't talk to me about some alleged defamatory issue from 5 years ago when the kids of this state will never recover from your failure to defend them against the governor. please don't go there with me, sir.
Thank you for your reply, Mr. DeVore. If you take time to rewatch the tape, you'll find out that I did not say special needs kids. I said kids, and I think what you said about kids, whether special needs or not, is despicable.
Okay. All right. I think them losing their education for years and never going to recover because you failed them is despicable. Thank you, sir.
Okay. We are about at closing time. Brendan, do you have anything else you need to ask?
I guess we'll end with one more question, because I think this has been very central to what the Attorney General's office has been in this state, and it's under statute. But for both the candidates, how aggressive should the Attorney General's office be in looking out for consumers in the state? Very, very quickly, but Attorney General Raoul, we'll start with you.
I think we should be very aggressive. That's why I've been very aggressive with regards to the opioid crisis that has plagued every corner of the state. I've been collaborative on a bipartisan basis, both working with state's attorneys as well as my Attorney General colleagues from throughout the country. We're in the end, we're going to bring over $1 billion worth of resources to abate the problem. We've been aggressive about price gouging. We've been aggressive about predatory lending institutions that have preyed on students within the state. We've gone after organizations that have deceptively marketed to kids on vaping and in other markets. And we brought back resources to the state in the process. For every dollar spent from the state's general revenue fund on the state Attorney General's office, we for fiscal year 22, we brought back $39.
All right, and then very quickly, Mr. DeVore.
No, most of what the Attorney General said there is absolutely accurate. You know, fighting those issues that he's talking about for consumers is an extremely important role. Specifically, he was talking about how they were preying on students, and I respect him for doing that. I just wish he would have worked a little bit harder to protect those students from the governor's unnecessary mandates, but I digress.
All right, and with that, I'm gonna turn it back to Allison.
All right. We've had a very fruitful discussion here today. We've been through a lot of topics. I think voters will definitely see some clear differences. So thank you all for participating. I very much appreciate it, and you'll see this on all our websites soon. So thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Thank you, Mr. Raoul. Have a good day, sir.
Thank you, Mr. DeVore.